on again. There I am.
Okay. So
It's good to see you. It's good
This
to
is
see
very
you.
interesting.
And then it's sort of, we kind of know you're there.
Yeah, no, fine. It's just I had another meeting and my internet seemed to be a bit unstable, but it's. This is fun, Rama, that you've started this, as I think it will complement my learning journey.
thank you. It's quite interesting. I think that model really spoke to me because I was just telling Andrew that we stumbled upon it ourselves anyway. So we were discovering that really working on a fluency with the terminology really helps. And we often don't think about that in technology. We keep showing, oh, we have to do this, we have to do this. But actually holding a set of words in your brain, like thoughts and groups and linked spheres, being very fluent with that actually helps you use the software. So I kind of, for the first time, started a formal training, if you will, with him. So while he does tinker with Thortspace a little bit, now we're doing it a little bit more, let's get the terminology and then work with each of the pieces so he gets more fluent in the use. So I'm kind of seeing fluency in terminology supporting fluency in use.
I was fascinated.
Right. I understand. Fluency in terminology goes with fluency in use. I think that makes sense in lots of fields.
Because if you have to think for 2 minutes to come up with the word thought, then it's going to be even harder to be fluent in use, or even if you are, you can't really explain what you're doing.
Yes.
So I think it's helpful to really master the terminology. So we started with a list of 10, and so where our approach is a little bit different from Steve Litt, because he does talk about building a glossary and a terminology diagram. We have brought in memory and fluency as very explicit parts of the process. So yesterday he was memorizing these 10 words, and so he memorizes them, practices them, and then it makes it easier. So now when we're actually working on Thortspace, those words are more available to him for talking about what we're doing.
Yes, I do have a Medium article about terminology. I expect you've seen somewhere. Yeah.
Oh, it's
gosh, I ought to.
Okay, this is what I was looking for. Awesome.
Need to change the title to make it easier to find.
Okay.
But yeah.
That will really help us for what we're doing right now.
Okay, so it's called Naming of Parts, which is a silly title. I'll change it.
You want to call it something like Thortspace?
Yes,
component?
I'll change it to something that makes it easier to find.
Okay. or Thortspace glossary?
Thortspace glossary, yeah, that's a good name for it. Or even several of these things, taxonomy, glossary.
Can you
whatever you think to look for it under, you'll find it.
Yes.
Will you post the link into the chat? I've created a Wakelet where I'm compiling useful articles on learning Thortspace, so I'll just add it to that.
What we're doing mirrors that, but there are differences because he doesn't really talk about, as I said, the memory part of it. But he does talk about terminology first. And over the years, I've been working a lot. I trained up to black belt with Dr. Derek Cabrera on the DSRP method, and then the Thortspace, and worked with Plectica. And over the years, I've really, without knowing it, I have sort of drifted towards the terminology first approach. So terminology and terminology maps is really where I tend to go to start learning, typically. But I've also brought in a lot of thinking in terms of memory and fluency. So the whole of last year when Anant was in his program in India, because in India, a lot of the writing is still memory based. So I was like, okay, how is he going to be writing these 3-hour exams? So we really gave a lot of thought to how we are going to memorize. And we discovered this, really, it sounds almost silly, but the trick that we found was memorize a list of words. So we would do every lesson that we did, and he was doing a lot of anatomy, and that's very heavy in terminology. So for every system, we would make a list of words and have him memorize that as the first step. And then we kind of came up with a build an essay tricks. So, you know, sometimes just holding the whole essay and trying to remember and write is very difficult. So just memorizing the list of words and then building the essay and explanation from there.
Building
and we tested it and tested it.
Building the essay around the keywords.
Yes.
So you remember all the keywords.
Yes.
And then that's your skeleton. And
yes.
then as long as you remember all the keywords,
yes,
then you remember all the key points that,
yes,
that explain all of those keywords.
Yes. And in fact, it might be also worth, Colin, looking at the work on, there's a program on writing by the Institute of Excellence in Writing. And that has a very interesting approach too, because they talk about, you know, you look at paragraphs and you look for keywords, and then you make keyword outlines and you narrate. So you sort of have this process which links reading to writing, which we don't see a lot. Usually they're just telling you to write, and it's linked through this keyword approach. So sort of all of those things come together, but the piece that nobody seems to be talking about is memory. And so that's the piece that I've really focused on a lot for the last year, is memorize a bunch of terms. And people do a lot of these flashcards and things like that, but that gets it sometimes even more chaotic, because now you have 2,000 flashcards. And if I have to write an essay, I have no quick way of pulling on things. So basic workflow we came up with was, we don't actually start from the terminology, we actually start from the list of words. So so for Thortspace, the first thing we did, made a list of 10 keywords. So we had thoughts, group, sphere, and we had 10 words. The first step was to memorize those words. And then, you know, we went to Thortspace and looked at them one by one and tried to observe an existing sphere and point to all the things. So that's where we started the learning process. So, you know, within a day, and it was quite fast. Now within a day, he's already more fluent with the basic 10 words. So he's talking about the present mode and think mode and those things.
You know, this is where the work that I do in sketchnoting also complements the process.
Yes. Yes.
If you can express a whole sentence in one picture.
Yes.
So have you heard of Gestalt theory?
Yes.
I had an interesting interaction in the week with a copywriter in Britain that I did some sketch work for a while ago. And she wrote an article. I hadn't come across Gestalt theory, but she wrote an article, and in her article, she used Sketchnote, but in a progressive way. So she drew a pair of ears. And she said in the article, when you recognize this is. So it started off with a set of ears, and then it was a nose, a snout, then it was a line to a back, then it was a tail, and eventually it was a mouse.
Yeah,
but
I saw that article. You posted that, yes.
At a point in time,
right,
you don't need to go further, because Gestalt theory says your brain connects things. So the keyword concept is the same. You can fill in the gaps.
Yes.
If you just connect 2 keywords or 3 keywords, it's very fascinating.
That's really interesting. And so the other thing that's happened is, you know, we've really started using Thortspace and Plectica together. I think they work really well together for learning. What I find over and over, just my personal experience, the sphere design that seems to work for me best is what I've been using since yesterday. A very simple, what I call simple storytelling with Thortspace. So I really have, one. So that's just basically it. So it's really not a group, but I have to use the group functionality. So I just have one thought in the group, and that reflects the GSS component we are looking at. So on 523, for example, we chose a direction, which is to use the rapid learning method to learn Thortspace. So that was the first, and that's all it says. We made a commitment to go in this direction. The next one, we actually started this process and did our first lesson. And I just left it as at initiating, because the lessons, it's not something that you just do once and just forget it. So if you've introduced the vocabulary in that, that's a lesson we go back to over and over again till he's really become fluent in that vocabulary. So that's a lesson we revisit many times. Whereas there are certain other things we may just start and be done. And, for example, we will do our first incremental learning project today. Once that project is done, it's done, then we go on to the next one. But the terminology lessons, I think we keep coming back to over and over again. So that's why I left it at initiating, and then it'll move to sustaining, because we're going to keep that going. So today we're going to start the incremental exercise. So this is one way in which I think Thortspace can be used. There are a few different sort of scenarios I can think of, because we kind of just assume that everyone's just going to jump into Thortspace and create their own. But I'm seeing a few different categories. One is Thortspace viewers. So somebody might just view the journeys somebody else has created, for example. But the second way, which I'm going to use a lot with Anand, especially, and that's the route I see for GSS, is to make templates available. So in this case, I'm helping him build the learning Thortspace journey. I'm doing that with him. But today, I'm going to have him start creating his own journey. But what he'll do is copy my sphere, because when he copies the sphere I created, there are all the categories there. All the GSS components are there either as categories or they're there in pictures, right? So once he copies the sphere, the entire GSS logic is actually built into his sphere already. And so then I can give him very simple instructions like create a thought, and then I've just told him to create an empty thought just to put it in, just to get the group. And then once he has the group, he can put the text in and then knock off the empty thought. And then write a little bit of text describing whatever he was doing. So I told him, we are starting on data camp. And then I said, okay, why don't you start with spreadsheets? Because that's easy. And so while we are building these systems, he can be doing an easy one instead of something really intense on R or something like that. So we said, let's start with that so that we can do this Thortspace Plectica system. Let's get that going. And so that's the idea. But I think coming back to the point, the design that seems to work best for us, at least, is something as simple as that. And the first time we did that was when we documented Anand's piano journey. So all we did was he played here, and this event happened, and it was very, very simple. And at that time, the significance of it didn't strike me. But I find myself returning to that design, and I think that's really where we are staying. So we have the categories, all the GSS components are there, and each day we sort of document our journey. The details are in Plectica. Plectica with its cards, I think it works better it's very compact. And putting all the keywords and practicing the keywords, it seems to work well in Plectica. You can also, there are some benefits with Plectica too, because you can drop down to many levels. So I can put a card within a card within a card within a card. And so for terminology diagramming, I think Plectica is good. But what it also does, so going back to the idea that I had tossed out earlier, which is, looking at an ecosystem of tools rather than a single one.
Yes. Yeah.
I think there's an advantage to saying, Thortspace is really, really good for journeys and storytelling. It's visually engaging. And if I, put it as an even image in my Wakelet compilation or anywhere else, it shares really well on social media, the TS spheres. And that's a big plus. And then I actually link to all my Plectica maps from within Thortspace. And that's where my heavy duty conceptual work is going on. From a learner's point of view, I think there are some benefits to that, because now Anant will know that whenever we come to Thortspace, we're talking about the learning experience, the personal journey. Whereas whenever he goes to Plectica, it's the terminology, the concepts he's learning. So I'm seeing some benefits in actually thinking of a set of tools, and so you know that you're using this for this and this tool for something else.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, software developers tend to just talk about their own product, which is natural, but to sort of create a culture of saying, encouraging people to share how you're using Thortspace as part of your tools ecosystem.
Yes.
Might actually benefit your user community. So I may be integrating Thortspace with Plectica. Colin does a lot with Thortspace and Wakelet, and I do Thortspace and Wakelet as well.
Yes.
And there may be many other potential combinations.
Yes. Colin, could you say something about how your use contrasts or
Yeah, sorry, I just killed my video. My internet seems to be a bit unstable.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, I don't know, do you want me to show my...
I'll stop sharing and you start sharing.